Great. So I'm Alexis. This is my husband Garrett. So he's an ISFP. For those of you guys who are wondering, he'll be around here sometimes. So today I'm continuing kind of the series about what makes certain types annoying, like what do certain types do that's annoying. And so today we're talking about the ESTJ. I'm kind of loosely going from types that are least popularly viewed on my channel to the types that are most popularly viewed. So that's the order that I'm choosing. So we're starting with the ESTJ today.
Nice. And quick note, with this series, obviously the title is most annoying, but we're not trying to be diminishing of each type. We're trying to encourage each type and create some growth paths. So it's not a fatalistic, this type is annoying and there's no way to change it. So we are going to present ways for people to fix the annoying traits about themselves and ways to grow as a person. Another note, it's very common in Myers-Briggs to have mistypes. So if you've just taken one test, there's a potential you're one letter off. That's most common. So, for example, if you're watching this ESTJ video, there's a chance, check out maybe ISTJ, ENTJ, all the other one letter off ones.
Yeah, that's most common. Yeah. Yeah, and I do have other videos. I have more comprehensive videos about each type, and at the end of those videos, I talk about the type's unique gift to the world. So if you feel a little triggered by us calling your type annoying, I guess, which I actually really like that. I love videos where they like roast types. I love that sort of thing, but I know that some people don't. And I will do this to my own type too. So I'm trying very hard to be very fair with the number of points that I do for each type and stuff like that. So I guess let's get into it. I have a whiteboard screen here that he'll put on the screen. So every type has 4 functions. So very, very briefly, I just want to go over the definitions of these very briefly. So the ESTJ's first function is called extroverted thinking. And so it's the extroverted meaning like external, the external thinking criteria, the external logical criteria. So a lot of times you're talking about thinking criteria or logical criteria. It's a lot of times metrics. So this is things having to do with numbers. A lot of the time, like external numbers like money or time management as it pertains to you in a group, and managing the efficiency of a group or managing the productivity of a group. And so it's a lot of times associated with like CEO types, leadership types, business books type things, I would say. Their second function is introverted sensing. So it's your inner senses, and senses are like the experiences you have. So it's the internal processing of experiences you've had. And basically that's a memory when you think of internal processing of experiences. So that's memories. A lot of times it's really liking stories, and it's really liking to process things after the fact. Like whenever you're processing something, it's kind of like by definition after the fact. So it's going in and processing. And so it really likes stories. A lot of times really likes tradition because you're processing like how did things work in the past? What can we learn from? Things like that. Their third function is extroverted intuition. And intuition are the things that are like not here currently. And then external things. So it's like, what could be? Okay, well, there's this idea. There's this creative thing we could do. So it's generating possibilities. And the possibilities are things that are not here now, but like could be eventually. Like kind of futuristically outside of time, sort of. And then their fourth function is introverted feelings. So it's your internal feelings. This could be feelings, how you feel about things. This could be emotions. This could be morals, convictions, but how do you inside feel about things? Those are ESTJ's most common functions. I've noticed, especially with people in their 20s, they use their first function a lot, and they dip into that third function a lot because it's extroverted. And then a lot of times, especially in younger people, those second and fourth functions are pretty forsaken. And so I've noticed that leads to some patterns when it comes to being annoying. I found that a lot of times in a lot of the types, what annoys people is this lack of balance. It's too much in your first function, not a nuanced enough second function, too much in your third function, and not enough in your fourth function. So I've drawn kind of arrows here. So the ones that are up are like, tend to use those too much. The ones that are down, use those not enough. And that's kind of what annoys people. In my other videos, I talk about kind of how I think introversion and extroversion are both needs. Like you have a preference for one or the other. You enjoy one more than the other. But you need both if you want to be the most effective person you can be, if you want to be listened to, if you want your ideas to be implemented. It's really important to have both and be balanced. I think if you want to be perceived by people in the best way and really reach some of your goals. So I think let's get into it. So I'm just going to go function by function. I'm going to zoom in here and talk about, what's annoying about those things. You want to start off with something that's annoying about? Something related to extroverted thinking?
Sure. One of the first things I put, work without purpose. So a lot of times I think TE DOMs especially can do a lot of work. TE is a very active function. and they can do a lot of it sometimes without thinking through why they're doing work. So a lot of work without meaning or thinking through why am I doing this work. What's the long-term actually goal of this?
Yeah. I think as we're going through some of these types, I noticed themes with like what's the issue. With the ESFJ, I noticed it was a lot around conflict management where their annoyances showed up. For the ESTJ, I think it's a lot about a work setting and kind of balancing work with play, work with emotions. It's a lot of the annoyances with ESTJs I find to be just this idolization of work and hard work. And so kind of the one thing that I thought of is that for a lot of ESTJs I know, it's like hard work is everything. It's like everything that they achieve is through hard work. And it's like hard work is like it's not like a means to an end. It's like it is the thing. I heard a quote, nothing ever worth doing is easy. And I heard that from an ESTJ. And you think about, it's a quote that sounds good at first. You're like, oh yeah, nothing worth doing is easy. And then you're like, well, some things actually are kind of easy. Like breathing is worth doing. And, it is a complicated process, I guess, breathing. But on my end, it's pretty easy to breathe.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's this idea that like if something's fun, it's not worth doing. And if you hate it and if you're breaking a sweat and you're hating it and it's really hard work, it's kind of like puritanical idea, I guess. I don't know, but it's like if you're working really hard, that's how you know it's worth doing. If it's fun, nope, you're just a lazy piece of crap. You shouldn't be doing it. And if it's fun in any sort of way, it's like this idealization of things that are hard.
Yeah.
I think in that same vein, they can be very critical and not show like grace to people. And in my mind, I think this is because they don't seem to show that much grace to themselves. I mean, I'm not living, in how they're living, but it just seems like they're so critical of themselves, and then that gets kind of shared to other people. And it comes down to like details. This detail's not quite right. The house isn't quite clean enough. It's just very critical that things always could be better. And, to stop and think about like things are good right now. I have a life that I'm loving right now, and things could be better. Things could be improved upon, and the people in my life could be doing better. But sometimes you just gotta be thankful and like grateful for what you have achieved. And I think that comes in some of your second function, like developing that a little more, is where you can like look to the past and what have I actually accomplished.
Yeah, it seems like some of that critical might actually be related more to SI.
It could be.
I noticed a lot of SI critical, whereas NE seems to be open to possibilities. SI might be more prone to shortcomings or seeing where possibilities are limited.
Yeah, I think it could be. Another thing I wrote down is that it seems like they kind of only trust thoughts. It seems, and I can understand because your feeling function is fourth, so you don't trust it. Your intuition function's third, so maybe you don't trust that as much, but it's like thoughts are sacred. They're like, you know what? Thoughts good, emotions bad, intuition's bad, future bad, past good. It's kind of, that's how it comes off sometimes. It's probably more nuanced than that, but it's like, if I'm feeling emotional about anything, it's like, no go. And I think because they have their feeling function fourth, I mean, it kind of is good in some sense to like safeguard against something that's kind of infantile, that fourth function. But just understand that not everyone has a feeling function fourth. There are some people that are dominant feelers, and when they have a feeling, a conviction, a moral conviction, that's something that they trust. And actually, for some people, it's kind of that logical component's a little bit more messy or a little bit more sloppy. And so I think just providing grace for some people that when they have hunches about things, or if they feel a certain way about something and they cannot articulate it very easily in a logical way, that it doesn't mean that it's less valid.
Yeah.
I heard a quote, it's like, don't believe every stupid thing you think. And I heard that from like a dominant FI user. I think that's not something that an ESTJ would go around quoting, because I don't think the ESTJs are like, oh, I think stupid things. But your thoughts are not always as trustworthy as I think ESTJs seem to think that they are. Okay, finally the last thing. There's not as many things in all the boxes. Normally the first function has more. But I noticed that they take on a lot of things, like a lot of responsibilities, coaching the little league, managerial role at work, and all this stuff. So they take on a lot, and then they kind of complain about how other people are like not taking on as much as they are. So I think.
I had another note. When you're talking about thinking versus feeling, I've noticed that with a lot of dominant TE users, that they I'm trying to think of quotes like you can't trust your feelings, or a lot of the quote sort of from TE DOMs. Like feelings come and go, but your thoughts, what you believe about certain things, are dependable on long term.
Right.
Whereas I think there is this balance with FI that you need of your feelings do matter in a realm, and they do impact your daily life, and so on some level you do need to let your feelings have space to come up and to influence your decisions. They might not be the only thing that impacts your decisions, but maybe thinking shouldn't be the only thing that impacts it also. A balance of thinking and feeling to impact your life decisions.
Yeah.
So.
I do notice for a lot of ESTJs, it seems like they're more comfortable with letting themselves feel anger being an emotion, but less comfortable with crying or sadness. And I think maybe the least comfortable with joy and happiness. It seems, I don't know what it is, but it seems like with the ESTJs, they have a hard time letting themselves be childish and just to enjoy life and not be so serious.
Yeah.
Okay, should we go into SI?
Yeah.
Introverted sensing. Okay, let's see. What I want to write down is they can be kind of cynical. Not as bad as some types, but they can be kind of it's more so, I'll write down, judgmental. And it probably does more so go back to being critical, just very judgmental of people doing things that might be bad financially, or they're not doing things up to, it seems like even if people are doing things, it's not up to the ESTJ standard. ESTJs have high standards for themselves. They do things with a high level of excellence. And if other people are not doing things up to par, you can get this judgmental attitude.
Yeah. Yeah, I had, along with cynicism, sort of a SI pessimism I've noticed. Sort of world is meaningless, headed to destruction mindset. So whereas you talk to like any DOMs, and a lot of them are hopeful about the future is getting better, the world's becoming a better place. A lot of SI DOMs are gonna think the world is headed worse, to a worse place, or things are going to only get worse. And I can notice that in unhealthier ESTJs, that they think everything is getting worse.
Yeah, one thing I hadn't written down, I don't know which box I would put it in, but when I was making a list of all the ESTJs I know how all of them stand on politics. And that's not true of all the types, that I know how they all stand on politics. And I think all but one of them are conservative politically. Now, I do live in a more conservative region, so that probably does skew it. But I think that there are more ESTJs that seem more conservative than just the general population. And a lot of it does come back to that past good, future bad. And so any sort of politics that's going to cause things to not change is good. Like, let's just, 50 is good. And what's interesting is very subjective. Whatever time you happen to be born in is what they think is good. Like, when they were a kid, that's good. Anything past when they were a kid, bad. And, which is very interesting, because if they had been born 100 years earlier, then they would think the 50s were bad. If they'd been born, like 1900 or whatever.
Yeah. Although I guess I do feel like a lot of them study history too, and think about historical time, whatever they've studied. So.
Yes. Yes.
Whether it's Roman culture or, ancient church culture.
Yeah. Or like, I knew one ESTJ, and she had this whole bookshelf of Ronald Reagan books.
Yeah.
That's like a classic, older politics type thing. Okay, and the last thing I have here is, I don't know if the politics really fits in this realm, but is clean obsessive. Like, extremely clean, like lawns mowed to a T, bookshelf perfectly organized, the cleaning, so like the house is immaculate in general. And if people do not clean up after themselves right away, they can get kind of ticked. It's like, maybe you were planning on cleaning something up half an hour from now, but no, it needs to be done now. Kind of a lack of patience. It's like the house needs to be spotless now, and not patient about it. Whereas I think introverted sensing in general is a pretty patient function, but if you're not using it enough, I think it's probably that NE. I think NE is, combined with TE are causing kind of this lack of patience.
Yeah.
I don't know how I want to put that. Maybe like lack of patience. Just kind of loop here. Yeah. Are we good with SI?
Yeah, you can move on.
Okay. NE, extroverted intuition. One thing I noticed, and this is also kind of one of those, just it's like a loop. A loop is when you're too much in your first and third function because they're both of the same attitude. In this case, both extroverted. I noticed that there's so much in extroversion sometimes that they take up a lot of the talking time. I was looking at some of the types that I know, and I was like, these are some big talkers and some long-winded talkers. But they take up a lot of talking time, especially in a work setting. You know, you get them in a TE setting especially, and they like are taking up like 60% of the airtime.
Yeah.
Which is interesting stuff, but it's sometimes if you want to talk, it's like hard to get word in.
Yeah. Yeah, I put doing things for sake. This is sort of related to SI, but I put it in any. Doing things for sake of tradition, without thinking through new possibilities. So I've noticed there can be a tendency with ESTJs to do things because that's how they've done them for a long time. Whereas I think a balance of any might think through what are some new ways to do it, might collaborate more with other people, and then implement something new that might work better.
Yeah, I think so. This third function is very future oriented, but sometimes people's third function, they're very pessimistic about it. And so, whereas this third function could be good to use creatively, like what could be good futuristically, it ends up what could go wrong futuristically. And so, it's all this like making sure this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong. And so, what's good to do with these functions is to use them all kind of optimistically. So, instead of using introverted sensing to be like, tradition is the only way to do it, this is how we're going to do it, and the future's bad, to be more optimistic with both of these things, to say like, you know, in the past it was done this way and that was great, and then we can also incorporate these new things, and just to try to be more optimistic and a little bit more balanced with how much you value past versus future.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed that I think comes from extrovert intuition is they can actually be kind of bully-ish. They can make a lot of kind of making fun of others. Which is not something that's typically associated with ESTJs, I don't think. But that extrovert intuition is pretty creative. You know, all these different jokes, pretty sharp-tongued, I would say, with TE combined with NE. Yeah. And so sometimes they make jokes and it's really clever, but then you're like, I think I was just the butt of every joke that they just said.
Yeah.
So I think that's something. But you know that like they're not trying to be rude. So I kind of, I like let it roll off because I'm like, oh, that's not. But
yeah,
that is something to be aware of. I think who's the butt of your jokes?
Interesting.
I think that's all I have for this one. Do you have anything fresh?
I don't have anything else for any.
Okay. Sweet. Okay, introverted feeling. This is your dominant function, so I'm sure you have thoughts about how they don't use it enough. Okay, what are your...
Relationships is one thing I've noticed with ESTJs. So I think they have a lot of relationships. I've noticed a lot of ESTJ relationships are not very personal, though. It's very surface level, which I think we touched on with ESFJs also. It's not very deep because I think they don't share a lot about themselves. So they don't, and it might not even be intentionally not sharing about themselves. They might share a lot of stories, but they're not really sharing like their feelings or how they're doing. So a lot of times there might be things going on in their life personally, but you're unaware of it because they're not sharing themselves with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, sometimes I get the feeling that they are running and not at peace with themselves. Like that they're chasing an inner peace. And I think introverted feeling is very aware of its inner feelings. Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling depressed? How am I feeling about things? And I think sometimes if you numb out to how you're feeling, then extroverted thinking is just like, okay, we're going to work, and we're going to make the money, and we're going to provide for the family, and we're going to do all this stuff. And then, after 20 years, you kind of look back and you're like, how are my inner feelings doing? A lot of times it's not, it doesn't seem until they're like in their 40s that they kind of start listening to introverted feeling a little more like, wait a minute, maybe my inner feelings have some value. Maybe I've been doing all this stuff and I was not happy. Maybe I don't want to die just having worked hard. Maybe I want to like actually be happy. Maybe I want to have close relationships. Maybe I want to let people in. Maybe I want to pray and meditate and journal and, kind of these very internally focused activities that kind of tune into your feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like a really good step for both ETJs, ENTJ and ESTJ, is to reflect more. So whether that's journaling, prayer, however you reflect personally, I think that helps you get into FI and be aware of what are you feeling right now. Because I think a lot of them have good relationships with people, and maybe would share those things if they knew them, but a lot of times aren't even aware of what they're feeling. So taking time to reflect on what you're feeling, what are areas that you are frustrated with or sad about or angry about, or think through those things, and then you can share them with people. And I think that will make more meaningful relationships for you. So it's not as surface level relationships.
Yeah. I heard from a STJ, they recommend doing this activity with your kids, and I think it's kind of an infantile activity, but it's good for people that have introverted feeling forth because it is kind of infantile. And it was asking, you're supposed to ask your kids every day before you go to bed, what made you sad today, what made you mad today, and glad today. Sad, mad, glad. So it's very basic as far as feelings go, very basic. But I think as an ESTJ, especially if you're younger and you're like not in your 40s, but just asking yourself is very basic. What made me sad today? Like tuning into how you feel, and then maybe doing that. Like if you have best friend that you can do that with, or like a spouse or someone, just to try to open up your inner feelings to other people. And I think one thing that's really helpful is we Googled, there's like a list of emotions, and so because I tend to have some of these issues too with like knowing how I'm feeling about things, and so then I could just read through the list. It was like a list of 50 emotions, and then I could just pick one. And then now I'm at the point where it's better, but at first it was like I couldn't pick it out, and so then how am I supposed to communicate it if I can't even name it, like if I don't have words? So I think that's something that's helpful.
Yeah, I've noticed sort of along the same, a lot of older STJs I think have regrets along their FI not being accessed, sort of in their personal, like with their kids. They wish they would have had more feeling talks with their kids. So I think that FI can also relate to one-on-one, like if you have kids still, or if you have grandkids, or relating with them with FI. So asking even those sort of questions. Are you mad, sad, or glad? What about? It can be harder to ask those questions as a TE Dom, I think, to think through how are other people feeling. But maybe start to ask those questions of significant people in your life also.
Yeah. Yeah, and just I think sometimes it seems like TE Doms are like, oh, it's inefficient. Like we're trying to get out the door, we're trying to, get your soccer cleats on, get this stuff, we're getting out the door, we gotta be to practice on time, and it's all this, it's always like this rush sometimes with TE Doms, like we have to be there so quickly, and it seems inefficient to, stop and ask how they're feeling or whatever, or it seems inefficient to be late to practice or something, your kid's crying, like, okay, we just gotta go, come on, we gotta get to practice or whatever. But I think, stopping is actually the more effective thing. Like, it's inefficient on the short term, but I think on the long term, it's more effective. And, like, I've heard a lot of ESTJs talk about, like, I want my kids, when they're 30, to want to come home at Christmas, to want to come home at Thanksgiving. And, you've got, 18 years where your kids are, like, captive. And so you got to use that time before they have more of that.
Yeah.
Freedom, I guess.
That's good.
And we're not parents. Here's my parenting advice. Yeah, so I think some of the advice is just to work on those 2 introverted functions. The top one is introverted sensing. And so really getting into your past and reflecting, like, what lessons should I have learned in the last 5 years that I just haven't learned? Like, maybe what should I have learned and I didn't? And just, reflecting on... especially reflecting on your past emotional state, because that couples the introverted sensing with the introverted feeling, and looking at how was I feeling the last 5 years, and how's this trajectory? Do I like how this is going? Do I feel like I'm getting more happy? Do I feel like I'm getting less happy? Do I have more close relationships or not? And just, really reflecting on your emotional past more frequently.
Yeah, and I would say as you're accessing SI, your internal sensing, think through like the positive aspects of things too. So how have you grown in the past 10 years? Because I think SI can be critical, and I don't think that's necessarily always a healthy aspect of it. So think through positive ways that you've grown in the last 10 years and how you'd like to grow, and how that can help you grow.
Yeah, I think giving like grace to yourself in general, because you've heard the phrase like what you have yourself, you give away, and you do it subconsciously. You do it when you're not meaning to, and if you're critical of yourself all the time, that is what you give away to other people. Even if you're not meaning to, even if you try to hide it, even if you do it with a smile on your face, it still comes off. Like if you're thinking critical things, it still comes off and people can still see through it. And when I think of FI DOMs, so IFPs who have introverted feeling first, they give themselves so much grace, so much excuses. They're almost probably too much. And they like, if they don't want to do something that day, they don't do it because their inner emotions are a huge priority to them. And they prioritize joy over hard work. Mm-hmm. And they give themselves so much grace. Like, oh, well, I didn't do it today because this was going on. And it seems like they don't feel bad about it. Whereas I think if a TE DOM did that, they're like, oh, I wasn't feeling it, so I didn't do it. And now I feel guilty because I wasn't productive. And I think it's just important to really give yourself grace that, you know, you're not a machine. Like, I think you've probably acted like a machine for a long time. You performed to a really high level and it's gotten you places. But I think, you know, to go, you know, the next mile, I think it requires a different skill set that you used before. Like if you want to go somewhere you've never gone before, you got to do things you've never done before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
That's not, I really like ESTJs. It's kind of a hard series because I feel like I'm just crapping on the type the whole time or whatever, but I do really like ESTJs. I've got a lot of good relationships with ESTJs.
Yeah, I've talked about, this is one of my favorite types. Well, one of my biggest mentors is an ESTJ. Just because I, as an ISFP, want more TE in my life, and so I love their leadership. I think they're really good at empowering people, and they're just great leaders in general. So I look up to them a lot for that. Yeah,
you've learned a ton. Mm-hmm. Which is super cool. Yeah, that's one thing I think to get around your opposite type. So for an ESTJ, those are INFPs.
Yeah.
Super emotional, you know, the type to be into spoken word poetry and write depressing music and be a hippie.
The hippies, yeah.
Yeah, the hippies, which is kind of the opposite. Okay, Grace and Frankie. Have you seen the show Grace and Frankie with Jane Fonda? It's an ESTJ INFP pair. Yeah. And they like help each other. They're like they're like totally opposites. Like the one's super conservative, one's super liberal, and then they like rub off on each other and they kind of soften each other's edges. And so the ESTJ helps the INFP be more productive, and the INFP helps the ESTJ kind of loosen up a little and have fun with life. And I think it's a good prime ESTJ INFP duo.
Nice.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay, well, I think that's all we have. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.